40 years ago, two individuals, Tony Bauza and Ruth Anderberg, a police officer and a part-time secretary, started a movement. This was a movement that transformed the Bronx River. And at the time they started out, the Bronx River was a stream that you could cross by skipping from one dumped refrigerator to the next, and that you could smell from a block away. And they transformed what was called this sewer shed to a place where fish, wildlife, and human life have returned. The movement they started is like a protracted dance, taking place over 40 years and still going strong. It's a dance between bees, or the small social entrepreneurs like Ruth Anderberg, and the trees, the more powerful policy entrepreneurs like mayors, governors, and congressmen. In the 1970s, the Bronx was literally burning. In some neighborhoods, 97% of the buildings were burned or abandoned. But Bauza, the police officer, was interested in a bit more circumscribed problem. He was concerned about illegal dumping in the river. So what he did was he organized a meeting of community and government agencies to talk about this problem. And Ruth Anderberg, the part-time secretary, she attended the meeting where Bauza spoke. And she asked him, "Why don't we restore the river instead of just cleaning it up?" And Bauza responded to Anderberg, "Well, then you do it." So this spurred Anderberg to action, and over a number of years, she oversaw efforts that involved teenagers, adults, and community leaders in removing refrigerators and other debris, including over 70,000 tires from the Bronx River. And they also planted trees along the banks of the river, and they uncovered a forgotten greenway, or a pathway that was actually along the river, and they also educated children about the river. Anderberg and her fellow stewards were what we might call social entrepreneurs, and these are people who invent new ways to tackle social problems. After 25 years, these efforts had grown quite a bit. There were about 15 or 20 organizations that were involved, but their efforts, or the dance, was a bit uncoordinated. And to have a larger impact, the social entrepreneurs, those bees, those active citizens, needed the more powerful and permanent organization, the trees. And the trees actually stepped in. So in 1997, a group called Partnerships for Parks, which was part of the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, and also part of the City Parks Foundation, they convened a meeting of the Bronx River Working Group. And they started coordinating all these disparate efforts. One of the first things that happened was they received funding, actually $180,000, from a federal program called the Urban Resource Partnership. So we can think of Partnerships for Parks as a policy entrepreneur. Policy entrepreneurs are people or groups of people who are in powerful positions and who undertake actions to leverage resources to create new ways of doing things. Policy entrepreneurs not only have vision, but they're also endowed with sufficient authority and legitimacy, as well as open links with community members or those social entrepreneurs. After the initial meeting and funding, this dance between the bees, the community organizations or the social entrepreneurs, and the trees, or the larger government and nonprofit policy entrepreneurs, started to pick up its pace. And one of the things that happened was community groups began to redefine the meaning of the Bronx River. They commissioned artists to create a 3 feet diameter golden ball. They called it the Bronx River Ball. And the ball was a symbol of sun, energy, and spirit of the Bronx River. And they floated this ball down the length of the Bronx River. At places along the 10-mile procession, community groups staged presentations, and they carried out cleanup projects. They planted trees. And they hailed the symbolic golden ball as it floated by. And as the golden ball at last came ashore near the mouth of the river, the policy entrepreneurs stepped back into the dance. The group Partnerships for Parks announced the establishment of a new office to support citizen-based waterway and greenway initiatives along the Bronx River and throughout much of New York City. And then what transpired is what I like to call a policy entrepreneur's arms race. So the U.S. congressman that represented the Bronx, Jose Serrano, he steps into this dance with an earmark of $421,000 for the Greenway project. And then Governor Pataki, the governor of New York, comes down to the river and announcing that he is giving $11 million for the Greenway project. So not to be outdone, Congressman Jose Serrano announces that he's giving $11 million for the river because he believes that the Greenway affects the quality of life of the people in the Bronx. And definitely not to be outdone, the mayor of New York, Mayor Giuliani, he then gives another $11 million to this Greenway effort. As the pace picked up, the bees and the trees became increasingly intertwined. So in 2001, just 3 years after Partnerships for Parks organized that first meeting to bring together the disparate groups, the Bronx River Alliance was designated, or it was created, as the lead group in restoration of the river. By supporting the initial disparate groups coming together, by providing funding for the Greenway efforts, and by supporting the creation of the Bronx River Alliance, the policy advisors and politicians, those policy entrepreneurs, help shape the environment to support civic ecology practices. This shaping of the environment, or crafting a new context in which civic ecology practices are operating, enables collaboration across multiple practices and initiatives, and across a watershed or an entire region, which in turn enables these disparate organizations and practices, including civic ecology practices, to grow. Today, the work, or the dance, of the bees and the trees continues as new life takes a more permanent hold. And one symbol of this success is Jose. Now, Jose is actually a beaver. And when he was first spotted in the Bronx River in 2007, he was the first beaver that had been seen in the river for 200 years. Now, not surprisingly, Jose is named after the Bronx Congressman, Jose Serrano, who provided some of the initial funding for the Bronx River restoration and has really supported these efforts over many, many years. And in case you're worried about Jose being alone in the river and not having a dance partner, a second beaver was sighted in the river in 2010, swimming alongside Jose. So I want to end by quoting Congressman Jose Serrano. And talking about the Bronx River, Serrano said, "The river is not just a river. It's a symbol of life. The river is a symbol of a community not giving up. The Bronx River now has become a symbol of how you can turn urban life into something beautiful that can be used by all of the people." Perhaps reflecting back on Tony Bauza and Ruth Anderberg in 1974, and on the efforts of so many people since then, people young and old, community leaders, scientists, NGOs, nonprofits, and politicians, and how the dance between the social and the policy entrepreneurs has become something bigger than a dance. Serrano said, "We created a movement. We started out just cleaning up the river, but we created a movement."